Welcome everyone, and of course please say hi in the chat and where you're from, and I'm going to see now that I can get all the stuff working, and also tell me if you're hearing me fine, as usually there can be some issues when they're live and all that good stuff, but hopefully everything will work out fine. And today's topic is what we all need to get our sewing happening, which is presser fit, right? One presser foot and several presser feet. This is something that I will probably mix up during this live stream, because obviously, as you know, I'm from Sweden, and those are the type of things that I tend to mix up a little bit when I am talking. I'm going to say hi to people in the chat now. Hi Karen from Ottawa, Ontario, and we have Anne from California, and we have Trudy from Holland. We have Julie from Ottawa. Hi, Julie. And we have Stitched Up, Rachel in Yorkshire. We have Donna from Shelby in Ohio. We have Luann from Missouri. We have Eliza from Ohio. There are lots of people in Ohio, Missouri. And we have Lorraine from Oregon. And we have Anne, and we have Barbara from Cincinnati in Ohio. Lots of people in Ohio. That's really fun. We have Chris from south of Sweden, and we have Judy from Lincolnshire. Hope I pronounced it right. We have Sunny from New Mexico, Deborah from Georgia, and we have Odil from Norway, and we have Bettina from Hamburg in Germany. We're such an international crowd. This is so fun. We have Dolly from Southern Illinois, and we have Deborah from Georgia and Vicky from Hawaii. Oh, I'm very jealous of you. I assume you have warmer climate than I have here in Sweden. And we have Antoinette from South Africa, and we have Mandy from Sydney, Australia. Oh, Mandy, you must be up early, because I know the time difference is quite huge on this other side of the globe. So this topic is something that I came up with when I was actually splurging on some presser fit recently, because as we all know, and I suspect that's true for most brands, is that these little tiny metal things, they can add up a lot. Because I think if you start buying, a bunch of these, you probably end up paying, as much as you paid for your sewing machine, unless you have like a really high-end sewing machine. So buying the right ones is definitely something that I think one needs to be mindful. So I'm super curious to hear what are your favorites and what are your must-haves, and also which one has been kind of disappointed. When I thought that I was not the sort of person who was, splurging on presser fit, but when I counted in preparation for this chat, I realized that I have currently 15 different recipes for my vintage Bernina. So for reference, this I have a Bernina, and before that I had a Viking Husqvarna, and before that I had my mother's Singer. So those are the three brands that I've experienced when it comes to presser fit. So I have definitely, I should say though that about 9 or 10 actually came with a sewing machine when I bought one. This is used one. But still, I have definitely spent probably as much on presser fit as I've done on the actual sewing machine. So yeah, that's my presser fit story. So I'm really curious if you're the same, or if you have been a bit more frugal when it comes to investing in presser fit. Chris says, oh, the price that I am talking about here, he says it's only when you have Bernina. Most other brands are cheaper. And I'm also totally, when I had the Husqvarna, it was definitely cheaper. But there's also, of course, options, which I will talk about in a bit as well, to buy generic, which I have done, a couple. And I give you my thoughts about that in a minute. And I'm really curious to hear what your experience has been, if you have sort of skipped the brand route and saved some bucks on actually buying another presser foot. So what I'm really curious to know now from you guys that are watching this is, which are your must-haves, the one you would take to a desert island? Because obviously not all of us need 15 different presser foot. At least I don't. So I would love to hear your thoughts about that. And I'm going to share mine now. Of course, obviously, the standard presser foot, just mention it. Obviously, that's super useful, and you can actually use this a lot. So in fact, when I was thinking about it, I actually came to the conclusion that I only have three I think different presser fit that I think is like super valuable to me. And the first one, which is probably my number one favorite presser foot, and that is this one. This can look a little bit different depending on your brand, but what this is actually a combined blind hammer press foot with an edge stitch guide. Benin actually makes one with a just dedicated edge stitch as well, but this works just as well. So this is actually 2-in-1. It does blind hem, which I'm a huge fan of. I blind hem everything. I mean, when I make skirts, when I make trousers, even when I sew with knits, which I talk about in some other videos, I would try to remember to link to in the description section, I actually use the blind hem stitch as well, because blind hemming by hand, well, it can be relaxing, but it's also extremely time consuming. And I find that using the blind hem on a sewing machine is also really durable, especially if you get the setting right. So I'm a huge fan of using the blind hem, and I definitely think that having a dedicated blind hem presser foot is pretty much crucial, I would say, when it comes to good result. And what this one does also, as you can see, it has a blade there, and this is also guide when you're doing edge stitching. Either, I mean, you're stitching down a seam close to the edge. For instance, if you're stitching down into underlining on a top, or if you're top stitching jeans close to the seam, this little blade helps you sew straight. So this is like a magic work, especially if you're doing like very contrasting thread and all that good stuff. I say this is so invaluable. So basically I'm talking about two presser feet here now, the blind hem and the edge stitch guide. So I know that this is available, I think, for pretty much any brand, so there's definitely nothing particular about having the Bernina one, and I think they all work fantastically well. So if you don't have this included in your package, I would definitely, my personal recommendation is to definitely see if you can get that edge presser foot, and hopefully you also have the blind hem presser foot included. But if you don't, I can also really recommend you get one, unless you're a big fan of hand sewing, which I kind of am, but it takes so much time, and to be honest, the blind hem just makes everything more durable. And we have some faves here from the chat here. Deborah says, I love my blind hem stitch foot. And Julie says, I would take my edge stitch and my walking foot to Desert Island. And Stitch Up says, I don't use an invisible zipper foot for an invisible zipper. You can use a normal zipper foot and you get just as close. Good point. I'm actually going to address that in a bit. My thoughts about that, because I am in the same line of thinking as you are there. And zipper foot says Anne. And Julie says, I'm desperate to master my flat fell foot. Well, I've actually ordered one, but it was out of stock. So I'm actually really curious to try that one out soon as well. Luan says, I like the blind hem foot, just like the one you're showing. Walking foot. And Dolly says, I paid a lot for the rolled hem Bernina foot. Same. And I have some things to say about that one as well, which I'm going to come to. And my Desert Island foot is my Bernina number 10 edge stitch foot, says K3 of 5 kids. This is also the one that I talked about, which is a dedicated edge stitch foot that Bernina has. And when I bought my 11 thread, you got quite a bit of foot. Yes, absolutely. I actually got, like, I think I got 10 feet. So I think the older ones, I don't know about the new ones. I've only bought vintage sewing machines in my life so far, and all these has come with a good collection of presser fit. So I don't know if you buy a new machine, if that is the case. I really like to know that as well. And Elisa says, I agree, edge stitch foot, walking foot, and open toe foot. As a quilter, I like the Dawny foot. Oh, that's a good point as well. Cody says, my favorite is the jeans foot and the straight stitch plate. I'm really curious about the straight stitch plate, because I don't have one, and Bernina seems to recommend that for a lot of different purposes. And Suzanne says, blind hem foot is the best, use it often. So it does seem like we have some clear winners here in the chat, which is the one that we talked about, the edge stitch foot and the blind hem stitch foot. Of course, we have the walking foot that a lot of you also seem to really appreciate. The advantage of using a walking foot, again, this is a hefty investment, especially if you're a Bernina owner, but you can buy generic ones as well. The advantage of using a walking foot is that because how it's constructed, because you put this little fork and the, how shall I say, the pin that keeps the needle clamp, so it basically moves, the feeding is even, because when you notice when you're sewing on a regular sewing machine where you don't have a differential feed, you will notice that the fabric, the upper layer will be longer and the underlayer will be shorter. So that's just the cause of how the feed dogs move. This is especially problematic if you're sewing with stripes, if you're sewing patterns. That's, I can assume, I'm not a quilter myself, but I can only assume, correct me if I'm wrong, if that is the reason why you're so fond of a walking foot when you're a quilter, because you get that even feeding, and obviously you have this patterns, you know, the prints on the fabric, you want them to align. Also, some people are really big fan of using the walking foot for knits, because the same thing happens on knits that I talked about on regular fabric, is, and it's even more pronounced when you're sewing with knits, that you will have uneven feeding of the top and the upper down layer. I'm not personally a big fan of it because it does have a lot of limitation. At least my walking foot uh, can basically only sew a straight stitch and a very like narrow zigzag stitch, because the room here is so small, so it can't go like this, which kind of makes it not really working for any type of stretch knits, because obviously most stretch knits seams that you do on a sewing machine will, you know, go back and forth, because this will create like a really durable, very stretchy seam. And this walking foot, to my knowledge, I don't think it can go back and forth. And also, it cannot sew any type of decorative wider seam, because the opening is so tiny on this one. I think it's up to 3 millimeters, I think, is the maximum on this particular walking foot. So I can see if you're doing like more stable knits, I can see that it could work. And also I think perhaps for top stitching, but I wouldn't say it's like, I personally wouldn't say that this is like a primarily a foot for sewing with knits, because it comes with a lot of limitations. But then again, I know people are fans of it, so I'm definitely not saying it doesn't work. It's just that it does comes with some limitations. So if you're thinking about getting a walking foot for your sewing machine just to stitch knits, you definitely just consider those things, that it will primarily work with regular straight stitch, which you obviously cannot use if you're working with very stretchy fabrics. And also, in some cases, you won't be able to do like a wider zigzag stitch either. So those are the cons of doing a walking foot for knits. But as I said, it has its fans. Personally, not huge fan, but it's really, really good when it comes to keeping fabrics in check and in line, because uneven feeding is definitely a problem. I thought, to be honest, I thought that I was going to use the walking foot more than I did. I bought it when I was sewing a lot with slippery silk velvet, because I had huge problems with uneven feeding. So I bought it for that. But then I realized that I could actually control a lot of the fabric just with my hands, and also I use an awl sometimes to push the fabric. So I felt that I wasn't having the same type of control with this one as I did with my hands. But it's still a great thing, and definitely if I'm sewing with stripes and such, I am using this one. And also, I know if you have like a more fancy sewing machine that I have, I know sometimes, please correct me now in the chat as well, that some sewing machines comes with a built-in walking foot, which sounds like a cool idea. I have no idea how this works, but I'm really curious. And if any of you guys in the chat has some experience of that, you can definitely tell and see if that's worthwhile getting if you're doing a lot of walking foot works. Let me see in the chat now. Deborah, speaking of how much money you can spend, Deborah says, I purchased 50 different feet for the Bernina 590. I was broke afterwards. Lol, I can relate. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of spending. And Bernina sewing machines are not cheap either. So it's definitely, you can definitely end up spending loads of money on the Bernina for sure. It's a great machine. I'm not dissing it because that's why I have one myself. But also that's why I have an old one, because I can't afford to buy a new one. And Loren says, yes, the walking foot is only for straight stitching, which is limiting. Yeah, for sure. And Benina says the walking foot is very expensive. Yeah, it was super expensive. So I was a little bit disappointed in myself. I think that I bought it because I didn't end up using it as much as I can. I've recently revisited it a little bit just to make sure that I'm not sort of underutilizing it, but still, yeah, it's a bit too pricey, I think, for the Benina as well. But there are generic ones as well. Yeah, the Bernina 590 has it built in, and also the Baby Lock seems to have a motorized one. If I could see, Um, yeah, and Faf also has a built-in walking foot. And Deborah says, I still have my Benina 1130 and I wouldn't part it for the world. Same, mine is 1230. It's a fantastic machine. It's made in Switzerland, super durable. I bought it, I think, about 12 years ago. And I've not regretted it, and it's actually increased in value, which you can't say a lot about a lot of things, but this one has actually increased in value since I bought mine, so that's pretty cool. Um, and Coel says that I have an older FAF 1209 with a built-in. I use it if I'm working with plates versus standard walking foot. That's good to know. And Elisa says, I would love a built-in walking foot, but I agree I can't afford to upgrade my Benina. It's a great machine. Yeah, Benina, fantastic machine, but it does come with a price. So getting a used one is can definitely be an option. We have a lot of fans here of Benina, clearly. So maybe we're a little bit biased here, but we also have some Faf and Janome and Babylock users as well. So yeah, that was my thoughts about the walking foot. Another one, which is one of my desert island presser foot, is the zipper foot. This is the regular narrow zipper foot. The good thing about the Benina is you can actually change the position of the needles. You can actually sew on both sides, so you don't have to flip around, which is really good. But this one is absolutely 100% a must-have, I think. Not just for zippers, it's also absolutely fantastic when you're sewing. Oh, now my memory. You have to help me with an English word again because it just disappeared from my head. Piping, right? Piping, yeah. When you're sewing piping, any areas where you need to get really close to the edge, this is such a lifesaver. Obviously, because it doesn't have as wide plate, sometimes the stitching won't be as beautiful as it would be with a regular wide sole presser foot, but still, I just love this. And as was mentioned in the chat previously, up to well, I actually bought an invisible presser foot just recently, but this one, in my humble opinion, works really well if you're doing invisible zipper. So you don't 100% trust me on this one. You don't need an invisible presser foot. And I'm doing a little bit of experimenting now. But what I was saying that for my last Husqvarna, I invested in a invisible presser foot, and I used it, and it was fine. But to be honest, at the end of the day, I ended up using the regular zipper presser foot more than I used my invisible presser foot for invisible zippers. So lesson learned, you should think, but no, because I sometimes don't listen to my own advice. So just a couple of weeks ago, I actually ordered an invisible presser foot for the Benina, just because I was so curious to see. I'm having a bit of a different sort of a regular like mindset shift when it comes to my sewing. Is that perhaps I give up too soon on some of the presser feet that I buy because they have a learning curve. So now I have decided to actually see if the invisible presser foot on for the Benina will actually make this easier. But to be honest, and just like was mentioned in the chat earlier, you will get a lot of mileage just using the regular zipper foot. So that is like a must have. But I think it's usually included, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I definitely think it's included. Also, walking foot is awesome for my industrial sewing machine, sewing upholstery and oat canvas. I can imagine, because you get that really nice feeding. And Kate says, I have the 1230, I love it. I also have a 920. I wish I had it because it's of its strength, but do not regret buying the 1230. Yeah, I think the 1230 is a pretty decent workhorse as well. It's perhaps not for the most heavy duty stuff, but I find it works pretty fine. And Lawrence, the piping foot is the one I use a lot too. And Corey says the actual invisible presser zipper foot is fantastic once you learn how to use it. You won't use the regular zipper foot. That's excellent to know, Corey. So I know that this time I have not wasted money, because I definitely felt that I wasted money when I bought the invisible zipper foot for my Husqvarna. But I think it's more a case of me being a bit impatient, or at least my former sewing self was a bit impatient. So hearing this definitely makes me, and I think that's so true for a lot of presser foot. I think we expect, like, oh, this presser foot will make everything so much easier, and then a lot of things actually become harder. And sometimes it's just because we haven't really taken the time to practice. So I definitely think that if one takes the time to practice, you will get much more out of your presser foot. So that's definitely something to be mindful of. So even if you felt like, oh, now I throw the money in this ocean, perhaps it wasn't the case of that. Perhaps it was more a case of, not being patient. Perhaps some, also, I don't think all, as I said, I don't think they're all necessary. And Deborah says, I made the same mistake with my invisible presser foot. Send your visible zipper foot back. I have two mixed messages here. Well, whatever happens, I will definitely do a test and I will do a blog post about it once I've done it, because I'm sewing a couple of skirts now in the summer. So that's why I bought it. So I'm definitely going to report back, and I will not give up. But as I said, I'm not 100% sure. Um, and we have some fans of the invisible foot. At least Rode Alcani says, I think the invisible foot produced excellent results too. Well, so we'll see what happens. They're very excited. And we also have a questions regarding using generic and adapters ones. K3 or 5 cases, has any Benina users purchased an adapter or purchased affordable snap-on fit? If so, do they work? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. I'm going to give mine in a second here as well. And Gail says she loves her invisible zipper foot. So, well, we have both opinions here as well. I'm really curious to see what my verdict will be. As I said, I've had mixed experience in the past. And Deborah says, the only thing I find is you don't have the iron coals. Yeah, it's because the invisible zipper foot. That's if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to pick it up here. Where did I put it? Yeah. So this has ridges in the plate, so it basically just presses everything open. So that's the advantage of it. So you're supposed to get really really close, but as Deborah says in the chat, you can get close with the regular zipper foot as well. And Coel says regarding generics, I have them. They work, and yes, they do work. I have them for both my Benina sewing machines. Yes, I have actually bought in my past. I've bought two generic ones. The first one is the gliding foot, or sometimes called Teflon foot. This one, I think it's pretty sturdy, but I was a little bit disappointed with the coating or the plastic, because I wasn't really expecting this. I think that the Benina regular one is actually better. So I was trying to sew over sticky silicone, and I was curious to see if this coated would work. It didn't. On my old Husqvarna, I had like a regular Teflon foot, and I thought that was a little bit better than this one. This was cheap on eBay, I think, if memory. But the construction, I would say, seems sturdy enough. I also have a generic ruffler. This one is for the Benina. I think it comes with an adapter as well. No, I don't even think it's perhaps it's Benina, but it actually came with an adapter that you can mount on your. Again, it looks really similar, I think, to the original Benina ruffler. I think it works fine. I think that the quality, in my humble opinion, feels a little less sturdy, I would say. But then again, compared to the other presser fit that I have from Benina, but as I haven't tried the original Benina ruffle, I can't say for sure if it's like as good. So these are my two experiences. I would say I think they're fine. That's my verdict. But I do feel in these two cases that I bought that mine, the original one, feels more sturdy. But I definitely think it all depends on where you get your from ones from. Both mine were both in the dark, basically on eBay. So I had no like previous recommendations for this particular generic brand, and I should probably done more research. I think it definitely pays to be a bit savvy when you're going outside of the brand, but you can definitely save a lot of money, especially for the Benina. And speaking of Teflon foot, there seems like there are several people in the chat now who has the original Banina Teflon foot, and they are very happy about it. So I think that the conclusion here is that I should probably bought the proper one. Lesson learned, but you know, we all make purchasing mistake, but that's why we're here talking to each other, so we can avoid making the same mistakes in the future. So definitely do your research. And also the ruffler, Eliza also bought a generic ruffler and hated it. The quality of mine was poor. Yeah, so you are definitely taking a chance of doing that. So I think I don't, as it seems like the Banina accessories are a little bit more expensive than a lot of other sewing machines. But I should say when I had my Husqvarna, I still paid a pretty penny for those accessories as well. So it's definitely tempting to go into the generic ones. But I will say though that all the stuff I bought that are original Banina has been amazing quality. I cannot complain about that. So and well, it seems like in general, more people are negative towards the generic brands than positive. So yeah, that kind of says it all, unfortunately. But it is what it is. But that's also, of course, why it's so important to make your research to make sure that you actually buy something that you will use. My third favorite press of foot is the one. It's basically the only reason why I switched my old Husqvarna 2000 to a Banina, and that is the automatic buttonhole maker. This is Banina actually comes with a manual one and an automatic one, and this is has like a memory situation. So I think there are, please correct me now, because I think there are versions for different brands as well. But the good thing about this is that you basically program and tell what size the buttonhole should be, and then this will move within that distance. So you only need to decide on the first buttonhole the sizing, and you can do that obviously on a sample. And then when you start sewing, this one will produce the exact same buttonhole over and over and again, which is fantastic obviously if you're doing shirts and anything that requires a lot of buttonholes. That said, this is not 100% miracle worker. I would say it works fantastically fine on finer fabrics, such as shirting, medium weight fabrics. But if you stop messing with, say, denim, twill fabrics, this tends to get stuck. At least that's my experience. And I noticed someone in the chat saying the same thing previously here. So yeah, that is why I also use the regular manual buttonhole foot as well, and do just regular marking. I just find that this is needed, so you won't solve all your problems with automatic. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about this, and also from other brands that also have some type of digital or automatic, because I know there are other attachment as well that has a similar construction where you basically set the sizing on the presser foot and then it does the work for you, so to speak, if that makes sense. But it's a fantastic tool, and I used to have such anxiety regarding making buttonholes when I didn't have this one. So, and it removed a lot of that anxiety. And I've also done a video on YouTube on how to sew buttonholes, where I also show how to use the automatic one, which you can, using some really nifty tricks, you can actually make this an incredible, fast and painless experience. And it seems we have some fan of the buttonhole foot as well if you have a Banina. So I'm really curious to. Koa says I have problems using it on thicker fabric. Yeah, 100%. I think it just doesn't work. And also maybe one can experiment a little bit with the stitch length, right? If I say that right, I always mix stitch width and stitch length up when I'm speaking on the fly, but you can experiment that, because also if you're using thicker top stitching thread in the buttonhole, in the needle, that can also sometimes throw things off when you're doing using this automatic. So again, if you, as I said, when I'm sewing jeans, for instance, I have stopped using this one and only use the manual one. That's my experience, at least, because obviously you don't want to mess with buttonholes as well, because you know it's a pain to rip, because the stitching is so dense. So you definitely don't want to take too many risks. Speaking of that, yeah. Um, we have some really interesting discussions here on which Bernina models are great. It seems like the 1530 is not as good. No, Lorraine says, my Genome 15,000 is memorized buttonholes, but the best part is the stabilizer attachment with clamps down both sides of the fabric. Heaven. Now, this seems like an upgrade from the one that I'm talking about here, because if you get the fabric to stabilize, then it's even better. So yeah, that sounds super good. I should say one cool thing I forgot to mention about this one is that if, and it probably it's true for some other buttonholes as well, if you're sewing buttonholes on stretchy knits, you can of course use fusible interfacing to stabilize it, but if you want to make sure that it's super durable and great recovery, you can actually, using this Predifus, thread it with elastic, this elastic thin thread that you put in the bobbin when you're doing shirring stuff. You can actually put this in, and also you can use regular thin, like embroidery garn, if you really want to make embroidery garn. I started to speak Swedish now. Embroidery thread, if you want to stabilize the buttonhole. So it has like slots for that, which is absolutely genius. I've done that when I work with really stretchy knit fabrics, and it's absolutely fantastic. So that's something also a great bonus with using this, but you can also do this manual, but it's a little bit harder. But this one makes sewing over those stabilizing threads much easier. And Kay said, I had no idea manual foot button. Yep. I don't know if the new one comes with one, but my older one actually came with both button foots. I'm super button hole foot. I'm super happy about that, because as I said, the automatic one, it does comes with some limitations. Let me see here. Jenny is not a big fan of the Genome buttonhole. So he says, after having to try the Genome buttonhole, Bernina forever. You get what you pay for when it comes to buttonholes. And also Bernina 590 has an attachment you can work on uneven surfaces. That sounds really good. And Cody says, on knit fabric, do you use fusible tricot to stabilize the buttonholes before you sew? Yes, I do. I use it depends a little bit, but also always some type of fusible, thin fusible with some stretch, depending on a little bit what I'm doing. But I always use a fusible when I'm sewing buttonholes on knits. But if you add the elastic cording, then you'll have like the most stable buttonholes ever if you want to make that extra effort. So that's also good to know, and the automatic one works well on it for sure. So there are obviously a lot of other Precifoot that we can talk about. I'm going to talk now about my enemy, which is, can I see if I can find this one? They all look so similar. This one. Well, I've had this. This is the narrow roll hem foot, and we talked about this in a previous chat, and I also just the other day, yesterday, did an Instagram post over at my Instagram account, which is Last Stitch, by the way, where I talked about my struggles, and apparently I'm not alone with this, because this is a beast to tackle, in my humble opinion. I've had it, the first sewing machine I had, the Singer, I had it for, and I tried to hem taffeta dresses, vintage dresses that I was trying to shorten, and it ended up a big mess. Then it was included in for my Husqvarna Viking. I tried again to hem those soft silky or satin fabrics. Again, I never managed to achieve a consistent hem, because especially if you're hemming wide skirts, it's a long stretch, and there are so many things that seems to go wrong with this one, especially if you're like me and haven't practiced enough. And secondly, when you're sewing over the side seams, I've found that it tends to mix with how the fabric behaves. So, for instance, I was doing some samples last night, and then the fabric sort of slip through the roll when I was sewing over the side seams, so I ended up, getting the fabric to not roll properly when I was sewing over the side seams. So a lot of people commented on my Instagram post over at Last Stitch, and some had have success, and a lot of people have struggles. It definitely seems like the secret ingredients is A, to practice, B, to use a little bit more stable fabric. So for instance, I'm going to show you some samples now. I was working with really soft rayon yesterday, and that was really hard because it kept slipping out from the roll basically. So I had to be like super focused and find like a spot on my nails so that I can fold it exactly there, and just keep it super controlled while I was folding it. So I was like almost having a headache because I was concentrating so much, and it worked fine until I reached the side seam, and then of course the fabric let loose. I can see if you can see, but I bought the one that folds 4mm because I thought that was like the most useful one, and it looks this, and I said, now of course, I mean, it looks okay, but as I said, also got a little bit wonky after the side seam. It got a little bit of a curve, and then it returned to looking good again. So obviously, if you're hemming scarves, for instance, then I can imagine that this is a fantastic tool, and especially if you learn how to use it for corners, which I have not mastered yet. But when you're hemming, and also if you're hemming a sleeve on the flat, I can imagine this can work really well. But if you're hemming like a wide skirt with side seams and goddets, those panels, I feel like it can be troublesome. I actually watched the Banina video tutorial just before this live stream, and they actually recommended when you're doing this sort of slippery fabrics, that one should start using spray starch just to give that stability, because that was the hardest part, just keeping it from slipping. Maybe maybe it would have been easier if I had picked the even more narrow one, which is only 2mm, but that's a bit too narrow for mine. I wanted 4mm because I feel that's a bit more versatile. So I'm really curious to know, now that I've been on a rant about my enemy. It's not my frenemy, it's basically just an enemy at this point. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about this one and your experience, and if you have any tips on how to make this process easy, because obviously those super narrow hems is kind of hard to do without it. I like to do like a narrow hem where I stitch, say 4 or 5mm from the edge. I make a straight stitch, and then I use that as a guide. So I press it, and then I fold it over and stitch again. So that creates a similar look, but it's a little bit wider because I cannot get that sort of narrow hem down to, I mean, less than, it's probably, I would say, maybe 8mm when you're done with the folding. 7-8mm, that works fine for a lot of makes. But if I were doing like a very soft, silky, wide skirt, I think that would perhaps be a little bit too wide. I'm not sure, but yeah. So we have a lot of rolled hammerfoot. I'm going to see now here if I can get back to the chat. Yeah, we have a lot of suggestions about the rolled hammerfoot. Corey says, my enemy, the rolled hammerfoot. So we're on the same page about that one. And Corey says, I have practiced and practiced and practiced, but I never could make it work. It was just a hot mess. And Deborah says, I want to get the roll hammer, have to seriously think about it now. I don't want to discourage you, Deborah, but you definitely need to prepare that this has a learning curve. I don't think anyone would say otherwise. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Rodal Kenny says, I have 5 roll hammerfoot and master them on straight edges only. I have to work on them for curved edges. They are very difficult. Yeah, because when the edge is curved, that throws into a whole other learning curve. I did a sample on that one as well yesterday, and I was not happy with how it turned out. Anne says, I've given up on the roll hem foot. And Dolly says, I have an ancient sewing instruction book that I rely on to sew a roll hem without the special foot. I'd love to know more about that. That's really interesting. Gail says, I also use the narrow roll hem foot on my serger, then press it up and stitch. I also start with the hem, which absolutely, yeah. And if you have a serger, then, you know, to be honest, you don't really need to bother with the roll hem. I use my serger a lot for making narrow roll hem. It's a beautiful, beautiful stitch. So, and it's much more reliable for sure, and it works, you know, it sews over edges, all that good stuff. Jenny says, I hate those feet. Been trying for 40 plus years, have given up. Oh, Jenny, I feel your pain. You know, I first began experimenting with this in mid to late 80s, so I'm going on 30 years also fighting with this beast. So then again, I've been giving up and have to take long pauses from it, but for sure. And Isabel says, I'm going to give your enemy a try. Good, and please report back, and don't feel discouraged by my experience, because that's my personal experience. And we have also a fan of the roll hem foot now. Silison says, when I bought a roll hem foot, I looked all over YouTube tutorials and most of them didn't help, but I found one that gave a few great tips, and now it's my second used foot. Wow. That would be excellent. If you can, please comment link to that tutorial, because I think a lot of us is in need on that that one. And yes, there is also Deborah's concept. The tutorials make it look so easy using roll hem. Yeah, they do. But also, I've noticed a lot of them are using what I would call more shirting fabrics, if that makes sense, which is definitely a lot more stable. So, for instance, I can definitely see one being successful using like a roll hem on cotton lawn fabric. But, you know, if you want to do silk, satin, soft rayon challis, yeah, don't get me started again. And Donna says, good to know. I was going to buy this one, the enemy. I'm a little shorter in height than you and love vintage clothing. They all need hem. Yes, I hear you. That's my first bad experience with the roll hem, when I was trying to hem those vintage skirts so they wouldn't hit the floor. Chris says, I also think that overlock foot for ordinary machines shouldn't be included in the standard packaging, because that just destroys everything in touch, and universal works better. That's really interesting to hear. I haven't really addressed that one, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about this one. I think what you're referring to, Chris, right, is this one. Most sewing machines comes with this one. It's like an overlock foot. The Benina has its number 2. I don't remember what it was for the Husqvarna, but it looks similar. So what it has is basically designed so you can do those stretch stitches that overlocks the edges. I actually find that it works good, okay, but I also agree with Chris, who says that universal works just as well. Again, it's hard to say, because sometimes I feel like the nuances of some of these specialty presser foot, they are so tiny, and I can't really my eye cannot tell the difference. You know, there's also, I have also in the kit that came with the Benina, I had a special presser foot for sewing decorative seams, but to be honest, I have noticed no difference between that one. I tried to read up on it. I mean, for instance, I'm going to show you so you can see how minimal the difference is. This is the standard presser foot for the straight stitch and zigzag stitch. And then they have this one, which is, to me, it's just basically a different way of threading it, because it has like an open diagonal slot here where you can put in the thread. It also has a little bit different shaping. This one is supposed to be better for decorative stitches, and also think zigzag stitches. But to be honest, I haven't really noticed much of a difference, to be honest. And we also have a tip for the hemming foot tutorial. Citizen says, Brian sews hemming foot tutorial. Even help with curved edge. I use it for hemming all my circle shirts. Now, this could be a game changer. So definitely going to check that one out. I love when I get all this information because we all can help each other now to improve our sewing skills and share all the stuff that we need to know. Also, another tip is Sewing Mastery. They have brilliant videos on their website. So that's really good to know. Perhaps also Antoinette says there are for Bernina in particular, but that's really good because I find that oftentimes, and that doesn't just isn't true for Bernina, it's true for pretty much any sewing machine I've ever owned, and sergers and a cover stitch machine, is that the tutorials that the makers do, they don't really address any challenges or struggles. They just say use this, place it in and sew, and then you will expect really good result. They don't really talk about all the ins and out that goes into sewing with a lot of tricky fabric. So that's why I think it can be a little bit misleading, because it's more like very highlight reel made to sell the particular attachment. Rather, it's more like a commercial than a tutorial, if that makes sense. So I'm so thankful to everyone who takes the time to do tutorials and share them, because they offer so much more knowledge than what I feel a lot of the manufacturers do when they are making materials for their attachment, the press foot. Definitely. Another foot that I'm really curious to hear if you're using, which I have just recently begun actually, because this is the let me see if I take, yeah, this one. This sorry, this one is on Bernina is number 8, but I can assume it's available for other type of sewing machine as well. This is a top stitching presser foot. So this is basically done when you're, or not necessarily just top stitching, but when you're stitching thick material. So they call it actually, in the Swedish manual, it's called the jeans presser foot or the denim presser foot. And this is designed, the sole of the feet is designed to work on thick fabric. So if you are having struggles using the universal presser foot, when you're top stitching denim, for instance, or you're stitching over canvas fabric, then you can check out and see if your brand has this top stitching presser foot. Again, to be honest, I find that the universal feet works fine on my Bernina. I tried to inspect and see if the look of the top stitching was any better with this one, number 8, compared to my regular standard presser foot. I couldn't tell, but I mean, again, it's a subtle differences, so that's why it's so hard sometimes, I find, to recommend those special extra ones, because you can do so much just using your regular universal foot. So I'm happy that they included it. And if you didn't know, I'm going to tell you that my next book will be about sewing your own jeans. So I'm definitely going to experiment more with this for that book and see how it works. So you can definitely check that book when it will be out, hopefully next year. We'll see how that goes. So that's something I will talk more about in that book, using different stitching techniques, and also how you can use this one instead. Let me see here. Do we have any other ones that I forgot to mention? I also have a few odd ones that I'm actually not sure myself if they're good or bad. This one is, I don't know if this is very particular for the Bernina, but this one is called like a marking foot. So it has like a blade in the middle, and it's supposed to, you can use this when you're like doing marking, for instance, if you're thread marking something, and you can also apparently use it for, let me see what say, embroideries. I have never tried this one. I have no idea how to use it, but yeah, so it's number 7 from the older model. So if you have an experience with this, please tell me. Yeah, that was, in fact, I think I've run through all of them. Have I not? So now I'm really curious also to hear your thoughts. One that I don't have, which I'm really curious to hear if you like and can recommend, is to use a clear presser foot. Now I have this for my cover stitch machine and I love having it, but I have not invested it for regular sewing machine because I do find that the metal ones in general, and that's true for the cover stitch machines, but it just seems to be more powerful and give like a better feeding. It's a little bit more flimsy. At least that's my experience, both from my old Fuff machine that I had before I bought the Janome cover stitch machine. I don't know. It could be all in my head, but it's definitely helpful, obviously, because in the cover stitch machine, it's super helpful to help you sew straight. So I'm really curious to see if you're. We seem to have a little bit of a lag now. I'll see if I can return to it.